Welcome to the Bookers Alliance podcast, where we hold the pencil and the pencil is power. Coming at you right now is your host, Marky Mark, along with the man, the myth, the legend, Frank Donaldson. Join us as we discuss the ever-changing landscape of professional wrestling. So hang on tight, you jabronis, and enjoy the ride. Welcome in, everybody. Pull yourself up a ringside seat. The Bookers Alliance is coming at you today with another fresh new episode. And in today's topic, we're going to be talking about factions. We're going to list our top 5 favorite factions, not in any particular order, but these are some of the factions that we thought made the most impression on the pro wrestling community. So as always, I'm one of your co-hosts, Marky Mark, coming at you with my other tag team partner in crime, Mr. Frank Donaldson. Frank, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm good. I definitely can't complain. One of my most favorite topics to talk about in wrestling is the faction. So I'm really excited for today's episode.
Good deal. All right, let's get out of the gate talking about D-Generation X.
Uh-oh, are you ready?
Are you ready?
No, I said, are you ready?
Then, for the thousands, no, I'm going to do the whole thing.
We've only got a certain amount of time.
Only got a certain amount of time. But yeah, talk about just kicking it right off the gate. Man, the catchphrases that come out of this faction, just amazing. Obviously, let's start off with our original members of D-Generation X. That would be Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and the ninth wonder of the world herself, Chyna.
Oh, yeah. And don't forget Ravishing Rick Rude.
Oh, yeah, there was Ravishing Rick Rude.
Rick was around there for a little bit in there, too. So, yeah, he had a taste of glory in D-Generation X.
Yeah, he was unfortunately eclipsed by the shadow that was Chyna.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, Rick was far on the downside of his career.
Yeah.
Then, of course, he pulled the same night jump from DX to NWO, when he was on Raw early, on a taped Raw, and then on a live Nitro with a shaved beard a couple hours later. So, he'll always live in infamy for that. But
yep. So D-Generation X, they were your faction that was not afraid to push the rules. Let's just say that. I mean,
a specific quote from Shawn Michaels is, "You make the rules and we will break them."
Absolutely. So there was no shying away there from your innuendos or your cuss words or your butt crack shots or
not in the late 90s version of DX. I mean, when they came back later on in like 06,
yeah, they were a little bit.
It
more
was a lot more toned down at that point. But that 90s DX. I mean, they didn't push the envelope; they burned the envelope.
So D-Generation X with Triple H and Shawn and Chyna there, that was a very unstoppable force, but as they grew in stature, they attained some more members. They obtained the Road Dogg Jesse James, the badass Billy Gunn, also known as the New Age Outlaws.
Oh yeah, and they lost Shawn Michaels to do that though.
They did.
Shawn had, Shawn, as we know, went out with an injury at WrestleMania 14. And the very next night, Triple H came out to Raw. That was one of those first Raw after WrestleMania nights that was memorable. Then Triple H came out and said, "We got to introduce some new members." First, he introduced X-Pac.
X-Pac.
He said, "We got to go back to the Clique," and, brought in X-Pac. X-Pac came in, did his thing. Then later on in the night, the Outlaws joined up. So we were off and running with a new 5-man group.
Yeah, and then with
that 5-person.
And with that faction, we got, let's just say, probably one of the most popularized taunts in pro wrestling history.
Oh, my goodness.
With the crotch chop.
I can remember, like, my younger cousins and that. I mean, grade school kids all running around just doing that all over. I'm like, how often do you guys do this at school? They're like, we do this everywhere. I mean, wrestling was definitely at its highest point at that point. I mean, it was so impressionable on the young kids, the younger kids that were watching, the teenagers, the early 20s, which was the age group I was in at that time. I mean, they were impressionable as all could be in pop culture, not just wrestling.
Yep, and that taunt, it transcended into pop culture. You had your sports stars doing it,
Oh yeah.
and getting fined for it. By the
Oh
way,
yeah, I mean we remember Mike Tyson doing. Mike obviously came to wrestling and started doing it.
Yep.
But he carried it out. It didn't like he stopped doing it there. Mike did that all over the place for a long time. WWE got a lot of notoriety out of that one vulgar gesture, as some people would call it.
Yep, and then there was also some inner turmoil between the faction there. You had Shawn and Hunter kind of fighting, along the way in the end there. But that's definitely, when I think back of wrestling in my teenage years, DX, man, that was a fun group to watch.
Oh yeah, definitely fun to watch. But see now a little bit different there. When I think about my teenage years, I remember D-Generation X, but I really, really remember a different faction.
Okay.
And that is the NWO New World Order. New World.
Too sweet.
Too sweet.
So obviously NWO started out as the Outsiders.
Yeah, it was just the outside. I mean, it wasn't an NWO. It was the Outsiders, doing their whole, Scott Hall came in as a surprise or as an outsider and invader. And then he brought his bigger friend who turned out to be, Kevin Nash. And then they went into the angle of, who's the third man?
Who's the third man?
Who's the third man? And so there's been rumors, and I think there's a lot of credence to this rumor. Everybody's running away from it now, but back in the mid '90s, I think there was really something to this rumor that the third man was going to be King Mabel.
Oh no. No, not King Mabel.
So I tell you guys all the time, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to Eric Bischoff's pod. Bischoff swears up and down that King Mabel was never in the discussion. But I feel like King Mabel was gonna be the third man. And when those discussions fell through, they had to settle on Hulk Hogan. That's how I feel like it happened.
Yeah, and Hogan, the stories have come out. Hogan he wasn't sure if he was going to do this. I mean, he had a lot to wager. I mean, he had always been the real American, the say your prayers, eat your vitamins.
Yeah, he was a kid's hero. I mean, He was my hero, 10 years before.
And the fact that he was going to throw all that away and become a bad guy, I mean, that was a gamble. So they actually had the storyline of Sting being the third man in their back.
Well, that's what Bischoff said. I mean, Bischoff now, he does say that. He said he don't know where this whole Mabel thing came from, but he says he had always earmarked Sting to be that guy, because Hulk wouldn't commit. Hogan was non-committal. So he said, hey, it's got to be a true WCW name. And I mean, the three guys that were fighting him were Randy Savage, Lex Luger, and Sting. Other two had already been in WWE. I mean, Lex was fresh out of WWE. Macho Man was not too far removed from it themselves. So you had to take a guy like Sting and say, hey, it's got to be this guy if you're not going to get Hogan. But obviously Hogan being the quintessential good guy, turning, that was the biggest move that could have ever happened. And that changed the face of wrestling.
Yep, and then when he came out and he was revealed as a third man, that speech right after he turned, it's just so much in my mind. The trash being thrown in the ring, him on the mic saying, "This is the new world order."
Actually, so Hogan said it was the New World Organization, brother.
Yeah.
And then, they cleaned that up in the back, like, bro, we're not going to sell New World Organization T-shirts. That's not going to happen. So he fixed it the next night.
So what you just said there, T-shirts. Could you go anywhere in the late 90s and not see an NWO T-shirt?
My goodness, no way. I mean, so, and it's hard to think that NWO and Austin 316 all developed right in about a month of each other.
Yep.
So wrestling as a whole was turned on its ear, and merchandising, as it was known, was flipped upside down, because those two shirts were the hottest two things in pop culture. I mean, again, you see your band's T-shirts, and you see those at concerts. You'll see them around, but you don't see athletes wearing too many band T-shirts to the games. I mean, you would see little basketball athletes wearing NWO shirts walking out of the stadium, or football guys wearing NWO T-shirts out of the games. It's like, my goodness. I mean, they had a gold mine there. I don't know what WCW's merchandising deal was. I don't think they had a very good one, but I mean, they had a go by. There's still NWO shirts being sold to this day.
Yep.
You go to a wrestling event now, when you turn on WrestleMania and you know, when you turn on all the pay-per-views that come on, when they pan the crowd, you're seeing NWO shirts out there. And to this day, I mean, you know, we're 2.5, 3 years removed from a 30-year reunion, and they're still out there. So,
Yep.
you know, as far as faction goes and the impacts they made, that one definitely made an impact.
Now, when you talk about the NWO, you kind of have to, you can't really talk about the many members of the NWO. We don't have that much time on the podcast, do we, Frank?
Absolutely not. But I mean, I think your key members were those three guys. They always were those three guys.
That was the core.
Even when WWE tried to revive them a few years later in WWE, you know, it was still just those three guys. And the same thing happened. They started trying to, you know, Hogan obviously got the big face run after his WrestleMania match. And then they tried adding other guys, Shawn Michaels, Big Show. And the same thing happened that happened in WCW. I mean, once you start diluting the original group, it all goes to hell. So
yeah, and it did split at one point in time. You had NWO Black and White, and then you had the NWO Wolfpack.
the Wolfpack,
the Black and Red.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So
still one of the best theme songs,
absolutely,
theme songs of all time.
Absolutely,
I mean, Wolfpack entrance theme song is memorable as could be.
Yep, and of course that side of the house was led by Big Sexy Kevin Nash.
Yeah.
And you know, I was a Wolfpack fan. I liked Wolfpack.
Yeah.
The music was incredible.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, they were tapping into a little bit of that West Coast flair.
Oh yeah, yeah. Kevin Nash has talked about that on all the documentaries and all that. You know, he's like, you know, I was a middle-aged guy dressed like Tupac because he was like, you know, I saw Tupac with the bandana turned backwards, and I mean, then you had Conan or K-Dog as he was known back then. You know, he was kind of doing that whole San Diego flavor, and you know, that whole bringing in that Latino vibe and all that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they. It was a marketing genius, you know. They took the exact same shirt that they had already sold millions and millions of and said, well, you know, hey, you got a guy here that's got 3 NWO shirts, white and black. He buy no more NWO shirts. He's done. He's out.
Right.
Well, now we take the exact same shirt, splatter it in red. Now all of a sudden you got to have it. So then you make a red T-shirt and put a black logo on it. Well, now you got to have that. So you take, you know, from what one generic shirt was, black T-shirt with a white spray paint logo on it, and now you've made, you know, 15 million different shirt versions of it and sold 150 million variations of it. So, I mean, marketing genius.
Yeah, and the NWO was ruthless, though. They really were ruthless when they first started out.
Their backstage stuff is why they're so memorable.
Yep.
What's interesting, though, I mean, we talked about DX first. I mean, you know, the core members of each group were all a clique in WWE, WWF at the time.
Yep.
And Vince found a way to harness that. We may not even be talking about WCW at this point.
Tis true, sir. So let's head on over to the next faction. And this was probably one of the earliest factions that I remember starting out in the early 80s watching wrestling. And that was the Four Horsemen.
Four Horsemen definitely got to be on that top 5 of all-time factions. Just because, I mean, the way they carried themselves, I mean, you could see those guys were different. You know that if you take those guys separate, Ric Flair was a star. I mean, you know, you look at that guy, he had those movie star looks. He had, you know, the quintessential 80s man. You know, he was that guy. But the rest of the guys, I mean, God, like if we go back to the original with Ole Anderson, I mean, Ole Anderson was, you know, you look at him, you wouldn't put him in the upper echelon of anything. I mean, you wouldn't even seat him at the front of your local Old Country buffet, more or less, you know, put him in the top of a wrestling, although he was the booker, and we know the booker has the power.
Exactly.
And that's how Ole got in that group. But nonetheless, you look at Ole, Arn, and Tully just as individuals, they're okay, but I mean, you know, none of those guys are standing out. None of those guys are headlining. They're not main eventers. But when you put that faction together, and, you know, they got them all cleaned up. They had their matching outfits. They all had belts. You know, everybody was defending a title. Yep. You started to look at all those guys in a completely different light solely because of the group they were in. Yep. Like I said, individually, after the Horsemen broke up, you know, Tully got into a lot of problems outside of wrestling, and, you know, he just disappeared off the face of the earth for a long time. Arn was always that mid-card guy. You know, he circulated around the TV championship. he flailed around in Dangerous Alliance and stuff like that, but he never got to those heights that he reached in the Four Horsemen. And, same, and the other spot, the Ole spot, that was kind of up for grabs. There was Ole, there was Lex, there was Barry Windham. Paul Roma even got in that spot at one point in time. I mean,
I liked Barry in that spot. I thought Barry was a good fit.
Yeah. And it made sense when they put him in the Hall of Fame because he was a good fit for that particular area because you had Tully and Arn kind of holding down the tag team championships. Rick definitely had the heavyweight title, but you still needed a guy for that, let's say, TV title, U.S. title, whatever that other reign was. And Barry was a good fit for all those roles until they elevated him up, when he split off and then started feuding with Ric Flair.
Yep.
He really fit that role good. So that was probably their best iteration. And I think that's why that's the version that they chose for WWE to put in the Hall of Fame.
And you got to give your credits also. Yes, the group is called the Four Horsemen, but there was a fifth member.
Oh yeah, definitely James J. Dillon.
J.J. Dillon, man.
He was crucial to that group's success. Absolutely. Which and as we look at managers typically are, the group that we talked about already, DX. Had there been no China, would DX have been as memorable as they were?
Nope.
So, definitely not. NWO, again, they just had so many people, as they grew in that. They really didn't need a manager in the beginning, but even at some point, they kind of had to bring in Eric Bischoff because you still need that mouthpiece.
Yep.
And that's what James J. Dillon was for the Horsemen. Even though all those guys could talk, they weren't slacking on promos over there for Horseman territory, but sometimes you need a more level head to just kind of sum it all up. And that's what JJ did for him.
I always wanted one of two things. I always wanted them to either A, put J.J. Dillon in a damn cage and not let him out near the ring, or B, take that man's shoes off because he hit so many people with shoes and his shoes flew around to the Four Horsemen to hit people with. I mean, come on.
Didn't they ever do a shark cage match with J.J. where he got raised over the?
I think they did.
So yeah, you got your image of them in there, but they somehow or other they let him out. So.
Yeah, they let him out, and I think he fell or something.
Yeah. You got to take those. If you're a manager and you're going up way up in you got to take the fall.
So that's the Four Horsemen as a faction, but one of those Four Horsemen transitioned into a different faction, and so we're going to talk about Evolution. Evolution is a mystery.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. Definitely one of the best entrance songs for a group.
Loved it.
Obviously that was Triple H's. I'm one of his favorite groups. He used them for so many different versions of his own music. But
Motorhead's just a phenomenal band, and then Lemmy had that partnership with Triple H.
Yeah. So that song was. Perfect fit for those guys. But then when you look at the guys that were in there, obviously with Ric Flair and Triple H, being the historians of the game that they were, they respected what the Four Horsemen did in WCW or NWA. So I could see why Triple H would want to bring it back. Then, we've all heard about, he wanted to kind of get Ric Flair back on his Ric Flair, give him his drip back, I guess you want to say, because Ric Flair had lost all his self-confidence and, he's kind of down in the dumps. So he really wanted to get Rick something that he could get back in that main event scene with. And being able to elevate two guys like they did for Randy Orton and Batista, my God, how many world championships are between those guys? You got Flair at 16, Triple H at 14, if I think Randy Orton's right at 13. And obviously Dave is only at like 6, but we know why. Dave cut his career halfway short and went on to do great, great things in Hollywood. So, but just take that alone, you're already at almost 50 world championships between 4 men. My God, what can't you say about that?
Yeah, I think though what made that faction cool is it was like a changing of the guard in all levels. You had your Flair, the elder statesman, Trips as your seasoned vet, and then your two young studs as Randy and Batista.
Absolutely, they did a Rivals documentary on A&E just the other week, and they kind of went across that too. You know, they said it was literally the past, present, and future staring you directly in the face. I mean, you know, but again, it was. You had, I mean, who was better than Ric Flair in Ric Flair's era?
Right.
You know, nobody. So
Yep.
at that point in time, Triple H was on top, you know, when Evolution was around, because Cena was coming up, but he hadn't gotten there yet. And, you know, like Rock and Austin, they were out. So, you know, Triple H was the man. He was the biggest thing in wrestling at that point in time. And then you had these, like you said, these two young studs, you know, Randy Orton, who I think when he came out, he was 23.
Yep.
But he had all the tools. I mean, they were touting him as, you know, that next big thing, even though, you know, he came out of the same graduating class with Brock Lesnar, they were still looking at Randy Orton like he's going to be that guy.
He also became the youngest champ, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, while he was still in Evolution, he won the championship from a man whose name we will not have speak. So, but he won at WrestleMania 20, and then he went on to pass the belt on over to Randy Orton. So yeah, we will not speak of his. No, I'm just kidding. We can say Chris Benoit here. Chris Benoit was a phenomenal.
It's part of wrestling
wrestler,
history.
So, yeah, he was
I'm
a
sorry.
phenomenal in-ring wrestler. So we're gonna take him as his in-ring you know, character of what we know. And so yeah, but I mean, Randy Orton was the world champion while in Evolution. You know, that's what led to him breaking off Evolution. And of course, then they rehashed the exact same storyline for Batista at the following WrestleMania. But I mean, they took guys that may or may not have equated to much of anything in wrestling. I mean, we had Deacon Batista before Evolution.
When
And
he was with Devon, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
he was Devon's Deacon.
Yeah,
Devon was doing some pastor gimmick, and Deacon Batista was walking around with a collection plate and a clipboard or something like that. I mean, you know, what a waste of talent there.
Yeah,
But and then Randy Orton, I mean, you know, he was still that young guy that you know, he had the colorful tights and he could do high drop kicks, but you know, he wasn't anything to speak of. He had a great look, but you know, that was it. And from what I hear, you know, he was getting into a lot of nonsense backstage, you know, just kind of running around with the wrong crowd and that. So I mean, he was at a culmination of his career where he could have went one of two ways. And because he partnered in with Evolution, you know, they nudged him the right way.
Right. So that was a definite cool kind of a transition for Flair. You kind of got to see him mix it up still in active wrestling, but he was also kind of the J.J. Dillon of the group. So that was really cool to see that group come together. Group was so cool. I had their theme song on my phone as a ringtone.
Oh, I think everybody did. I think everybody did. I can tell you, I definitely had it on mine too. That was back in the old Motorola days with the old flip phones. And
Mine actually went off in church one time, and my pastor looked at me and he was like, "That's an interesting song."
Nice. There you go. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, no, and I think everybody had at some point in time. Everybody had, just because I mean the intro riff to it.
Yep.
You know, just the little guitar riff to lead into it. And then, like you said, Lemmy's voices, he just went in, you know, and all gargly and just deep and ready. You know, it was impactful. You knew what you were about to see. And then, like I said, the heights that all the members of that team went to afterwards. If that doesn't land them in a top 5 of factions list, I don't think you're judging the right way.
So speaking of all the accolades, let's transition to our last one here in our top 5. Bring it current and put your one up, sir.
All right, put your damn ones up.
We're going to talk about the Bloodlines. So the Bloodline is the current faction of Roman Reigns, the Usos, Solo Sikoa, and Paul Heyman as their manager. Mm-hmm. So this one is very impactful, just the storylines that they are running with this group. First and foremost, the storyline alone. Can we just separate the storyline just from their in-ring work? Because I think some of the factions that we've talked about, storylines are great, but this is one faction that I think the storyline could just stand on its own. What do you think?
So yeah, if they were just 4 guys, you know, not related, not, you know, they didn't all look alike, all that kind of stuff there. You know, if they just called themselves the Joes and, you know, they just doing their own thing, if they told this exact same story and had the exact same character development that they have right now, the rest of the world will still be on the edge of their seat for everything that they're doing. The fact that they're, you know, they've got so much backstory, so much ingrained backstory, you know, from showing photos of when they were kids and in high school. And the fact that they're able to do that just adds to it. But the story in and of itself, with just where, with Roman, where he was the good guy and, he couldn't get over and he never could get the fans behind him. And all of a sudden he just turned into this guy. And then the way they told the story of how the Usos weren't really down for what Roman was doing in the beginning, and slowly but surely he kind of
turned him around,
wrangled him into the fold. And, all of a sudden, and now they're bringing up Solo, who had only been in NXT, yes, less than a year before his call up. Now he's on a main event stage every night, wrestling main event guys. He's in the top storyline. I mean, the Usos and Roman, they were already made before this started. At the start of this bloodline thing, Roman was earmarked to be the guy. So regardless of whether or not the fans were accepting him, Vince had accepted him. Vince had already said one way or another he's going to be the guy. We're just going to keep shoving him down your throats until you either accept it or regurgitate it. One of the two. And if you regurgitate it, we'll shove it right back down there again.
So, yeah, you wouldn't get away from Roman.
No, absolutely not. And the Usos were already multiple-time tag champs.
Yep.
They had already made their mark on the business. Just nobody had saw this side of it. Nobody knew they had the range that they're showing now in these storylines. The Usos are able to really come out of their shell and do their thing. They did the whole face paint thing, and we're the quintessential good guy. We're always smiling big and we're happy to be here, blah blah blah. That was really all we knew, but we knew they could go in the ring. So you overlook some of that. Okay, your corny is all hell, but you could go in the ring. Okay, we'll accept that for you could go in the ring.
Yeah, and then if you want to bring back their ring work, dude, I mean, they're phenomenal in the ring. Solo Sikoa he's learning the ropes. You can still see where he's still getting in there, but holy crap, man, he's come a long way really, really fast. And that's just a testament to who's around.
Yeah.
I mean, his family's bringing him up fast.
Absolutely. That and the fact that he's working with main event caliber talent. Right. So they're also bringing him up. They don't want him to look bad either, because then, why am I wrestling this guy and he's trash? So you want to make him look good. So any kind of shorts that Solo may have, you've got guys like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn and Cody Rhodes, guys that are well seasoned in the ring who can help cover up some of those little, imperfections and make Solo look like a main event guy. So, not to say that he's not already good enough as is, but obviously he's still young. He's a young guy. He's a couple years into the business. He's not going to look like Jimmy and Jay and Roman, but he can't. It's just not possible. But with a lot of help from everybody, from your dancing partners and your team, you can be made to look that way.
Yep, and then you got your manager, the wise man, Paul Heyman.
Oh, well.
The glue that kind of binds the bloodline together. Just an amazing storyteller, an amazing artist when he just weaves the matches and the stories together. Just perfection on the mic.
Yep.
Amazing guy all the way around.
Well, it's kind of the same like we said about J.J. Dillon. You didn't need that manager in there because all the guys on your other side can talk. But he, like you said, he ties it all together. He knows how to bring it all together. Solo is doing his own thing over here. The Usos are doing their own thing. Roman's at the helm of it all, guiding the ship. But somebody's got to be able to bring it all in together and keep everybody on that center focus and say, hey, here's the end goal. And you see him do a lot of segments with the Usos away from the Roman. You used to see him do a lot of them with Sammy when Sammy was a part of the group.
Right.
Away from Roman, like you said, he was that glue. Where Sammy's off doing this thing and the Usos are doing that thing, you still had Paul that could keep it all around and keep them all focused on, hey, here's what the tribal chief wants to get done. So here's where we all got to focus, and then everybody would fall in line as needed.
Yep. So that kind of wraps up our top five factions. Any order you want to put those in, you can put Bloodline at 1, Evolution at 1, Horsemen at 1.
You can put anybody where you want. Somebody's going to disagree with you because, these are all great factions, and everybody's got their own unique tie to them, so you're going to associate with who you want to associate with.
Now, we do have some honorable mentions.
We do. There's too many great factions.
There was a lot of great factions. So we're going to run down this list real quick. You had the Nation of Domination, the Hart Foundation, the Dangerous Alliance, Main Event Mafia, Ministry of Darkness, Legacy, Heenan Family, Hurt Business, The Shield, On and on and on and on it goes.
I mean, faction after faction after faction. And those of you listening out there, we're missing some. We know it. Go ahead and hit us up and tell us who we're missing. You know, hit us on social media. Tell us who your favorite was. But I mean, factions is just something in wrestling history that's gonna go down as one of those memorable moments because a good faction elevates people and gets, it creates main event players out of quote unquote mid card guys.
So
I think everybody that we mentioned, all the groups that we mentioned, even the honorable mentions, did the same thing. You know, it took guys that were either on the cusp and put them over the edge into that main event level, or it brought guys up who were never going to get there otherwise and got them into a main event spotlight.
Yep. So hit us up on our social media platforms. Let us know your thoughts on these top 5 that we put out. Hey, if you had one that we didn't mention, a la Bullet Club. We didn't even talk about the Bullet Club.
No, we didn't. I mean, so, right before we went on record, we talked about what about all the AEW factions? I mean, there's a lot of them. Blackpool Combat Club, the Elite. I mean, we know they're out there. Best friends. That we know they're all out there. Believe me, we know they're out. Undisputed Era. We know they're out there. But first of all, you're talking about top 5. And second of all, when you're talking about factions right now, AEW's only been around for 3 years. Well, in those same 3 years, the Bloodline has been going so hot and heavy,
dominating,
that they're really in room to talk about any other factions from current wrestling because the Bloodline's so good.
Yeah. So like we said, hit us up on our social media. Let us know your thoughts. And as always, we appreciate you listening in to the Bookers Alliance podcast. And with that, everybody, we bid you adieu.
Peace.
Today's podcast was produced by SBP. You can find our podcast on all major podcast platforms. Also connect with us on our social media accounts. Search for the Bookers Alliance on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.